It is human nature to want power, to be on top of the society we're part of, and look down on anything lower. As humans evolved, we have created countries, we've fought wars, and we've created new weapons. But during this time, we've also made a huge realization that brute force can take us so far, but influence always leaves a mark. So thus the race began. People from all over the world created new political ideologies in order to get the upper hand. Although many stayed, a lot of them disappeared. And during this mix, there's one particular political ideology that stood out the most. And this political ideology affects all of our lives today. And that is neoliberalism. So what is it? Neoliberalism can be broken down into two parts. The first part being neo, which means new, revived, or modified. The second part, liberalism, refers to classical liberalism. Classical liberalism is a political ideology that was brought up during the Enlightenment period. They strongly believe in this free market with little to almost no government involvement. They believe that the market is self-regulatory and that the supply and demand system is able to make the market sustain itself. So in short, neoliberalism is a new or revived version of classical liberalism. They share almost the same values and ideas. However, neoliberalism has a stronger belief in it, as they believe that there should be no government involvement within the market at all. Although once considered to be a dead ideology, neoliberalism was given a new breath of life during the Reagan and Carter administration. And due to these people, we see neoliberal laws almost in a day-to-day basis. But neoliberalism is a very vast topic. There's so many things we can go into. So I decided to look into two of the most important things, important tools used by neoliberals. The first one being deregulation, and the second one being privatization. And I wanted to see how these things affect our lives in a day-to-day basis. Is it helpful to us, or is it harmful? So I came up with a question. Are the two pillars of neoliberalism, deregulation and privatization, helpful or harmful to our society? And through my research, I've come to the conclusion that these things actually are harmful to our society the way it's used today. And here's why. First off, deregulation. In order to understand deregulation itself, we have to understand regulations. Regulations are rules set by the government in order to step in if a business or individual is exploiting the rights of customers or even their workers. Deregulation, however, is the complete opposite of this, as it is taking away these restrictions. Neoliberals are highly in favor of deregulation, and as it's helping them complete one of their biggest goals, and that is to remove government presence within businesses. Deregulation is quite often used by neoliberals in order to achieve their goal for a government-less market. Like everything in this world, however, deregulation has its goods and its bads. For example, the energy deregulation is a great example of how deregulation can be very, very useful to us. The energy deregulations allowed for energy companies to be able to set their own prices, which allowed them to be able to be more widespread. They were able to be more accessible. They were able to be cheaper, create competition. This led to people who are under the poverty line to be able to afford energy, as it was cheaper and more accessible. this also created more jobs, as with a lot of demand for energy, we needed manual labor, creating more job opportunities and creating more of an economic structure. However, deregulation also has its bads. Example of that is the Airline Deregulation Act. In the 1980s, in order to make air travel more accessible and cheaper, the United States government decided to deregulate it. This led to airline companies being able to set their own route paths, flying paths, and set their own prices. This was successful. People around the United States were able to travel for whatever worked for them best financially. But there was one big thing the government looked over, and that is that air ambulances are also considered an airline. This allowed for air ambulances to set their own prices. And today in the United States, the average airlift costs from $10,000 to $100,000 depending on how far out you are. On top of this, this has also been a way to make more money for hospitals and doctors. Matter of fact, 1 in 4 adults don't need to be airlifted, and 1 in 2 children don't need to be airlifted, but they are in order to get more money. This is also called a secondary override, where a smaller hospital airlifts a patient to a bigger hospital and just gets discharged. On the other hand, privatization is the act of taking a public good or public business and turning it over to private hands. This again is favored by neoliberals, as once again we are removing government presence within businesses. Privatization, like deregulation, also has its ups and downs. For example, the privatization of transport in Florida. To be more specific, Project Brightline, also formerly known as All Aboard Florida. The United States is huge. There's so much empty land. But if you're wanting to travel in your own state, sometimes airplane tickets can be very expensive, but car drives take way too long, right? It's exhausting, even from here to Denver. So to combat that, the Florida government decided to create a new public transport, and that was trains. The biggest issue with Brightline was that it didn't get enough funding in the beginning. So in order to combat that, what they did was they turned private. They let private investors put in money to be able to make this project possible. And it was. It was both publicly and privately funded. However, this case is quite interesting, as even though this was made possible because of privatization, it's still a public transport. This is an example of how we can use privatization in order to create more resources, such as public transportation. Even though we can have private businesses, we can still publicize it as private, but we can still act as a public good. However, there's also, again, a bad example, and that is the privatization of water in Bolivia. During the 1980s, the Bolivian government decided to privatize water in the 3rd biggest city in their country. In 1 year, the prices for water went up by 50%, and then it went up once again up to 70%. This made it so a lot of people were not able to access clean and drinking water, and a lot of people did die because of dehydration. Because of a privatization of something that should be universally accessible, such as water, a lot of people faced the consequence. A lot of people died. even though later water was turned back into government hands, the damage was already done. And it's irreversible. And it's a reminder to us that public goods, such as, or human resources such as water, should never be privatized. Another example of privatization being bad is prison labor, incarcerated labor. In the United States alone, prison labor make around $1 to $2 billion yearly. But the people who are working for us and creating and generating this amount are getting paid 10 cents an hour. This is very wrong, as one, we're just exploiting their human rights, and we're making them work for a ridiculously cheap sum of money and making a huge profit out of it. Although it is understandable that prison is a place for bad people and this is a good way to punish them, it still doesn't override the fact that they're humans and they deserve rights. This brings us to the conclusion. Even though deregulation and privatization can be good from time to time, from the examples that we've seen so far, it's been quite negative and has impacted us negatively. However, this doesn't mean that deregulation and privatization is bad overall. As if used correctly, it can be a very useful resource in order to boost the economy, create more jobs, and have resources be more available to the people. But the way it's used today is not allowing that to happen. Instead, we're exploiting people, we're exploiting human rights, and overall, we're just making it hard to live. I believe that we can make a change. Even though it's going to be very difficult, we can make it so that privatization and deregulation can be very helpful to us. Even though we have to go, for that to happen, we have to go behind the idea of neoliberalism and put government sectors to step in when necessary, it is the only way we can make it a lot more useful and safer. Thank you.